All right, geometry lesson and homework number 6. Again, we're going to do this all together. It's just more practice of what we did in class with our proofs. So we're going to look at our givens and then find out where we eventually want to get to. Notice that we're only proving triangles. We don't have to prove using CP, CTC in this one. We're only proving those triangles by the methods that we learned. Oops, angle, side, angle. Let me get rid of that. Angle, side, angle, 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 side, 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 and side, angle, side, where our angle is smushed in between two sides, and hypotenuse, leg. I think that the big question is, how do I know which one of these to use? Hopefully the more you watch these videos, you see the patterns. We just want to find out where those angles lie, what comes next, a side or an angle, and smush them the way that our diagram is shown to us. So the big difference with the tables that I have in week 9 is our given is all going to go in our first statement. So remember, we're always going to start with writing our givens down. So GH is congruent to JK, and they already have it marked on here for me. So I've got a side. So let's do that. I've got a side. And then I've got HJ is congruent to KG. And they've marked that on here for me as well. So I have another side. I only need to show one more thing is congruent, either it be a side or an angle. And hopefully we notice right off the bat, one of those things that we should be able to see by now is, hey, they share that side, so that side has to be congruent to that side, right? JK is congruent to, JG is congruent to JG. By terms of basically looking in a mirror, that's the reflexive property. I apologize, I didn't write this reason down. Given. That should always be done first, write your givens down. Now I've got a side, and a side. I don't need to know anything else. I have enough information to say, yes, indeed, triangle GHJ is congruent to triangle JKG because I know a side, and a side. And I'm done. That's it. So let's try that for this next one. Got my givens. We're going to write all that fun stuff down. So VX is congruent to XY. They didn't mark it on it for us, so let's mark that. VX is congruent to XY. So we have a side. Then I know WY is congruent to XW. So let's mark that. XW is congruent to, YZ, yeah. XW is congruent to YZ. So I've got another side. So I'm going to put a little S and circle it. The last thing that they tell me is XW is parallel to YZ. And that's given. All of that information is given. So I'm going to mark that these two are parallel on my diagram. XW is parallel to YZ. So I have to ask myself, why are they telling me that? Why is that so doggone important? Let's see. I've got this line here, this line here. They're parallel. I've got two sides. I need either another side or an angle. So I've got these two parallel lines that happen to be cut by a transversal. And let's see what we can find. I've got, let's see. This is my parallel line. This is my parallel line. I've got an angle here. I've got an angle here. So now I know that those two angles are congruent because of their corresponding angles. So VXW angle is congruent to angle XZ. Can't read XYZ. And I know that because they're corresponding angles on parallel lines. So I know that those have to be congruent. So I'm going to draw an A because now I know an angle. Now the big question is, what order am I going to put these in? I have a side, an angle, and a side. Let's see. If I start with a side here, I immediately come to an angle, and then I get to another side that's congruent. I have a side, an angle smushed in between another side. So side, angle, side. And all I have to do is restate what I wrote in number 2. Those triangles are, in fact, congruent. And I already wrote why. Because side, angle, side. That's all that I need to prove are 3 pieces of these triangles. Number 3, given PQ bisects SPT. So let's write that down. PQ bisects angle SPT. I'm going to ask myself, okay, they're telling me that for a reason. And I know that line segment SP is congruent to line segment TP. And this is all given. What do I want to eventually get to? These 2 triangles are congruent. So triangle SPQ is congruent to triangle TPQ. And we have to find out why. So I've got a side here. I'm going to put that in. I need to find either 2 more sides, an angle aside. Let's see what else we know. It's telling us that PQ bisects. Why is it telling us that? So PQ bisects SPT. SPT. If that line bisects this angle, I know that this angle has to be congruent to this angle. So let's write that down. SPQ is congruent to angle TPQ because the definition of angle bisector. Again, like I told you in class, if it tells you that something is a bisector, chances are the definition of angle bisector is going to be in your statement, your reason. So now I've got an angle. So I've got a side, I've got an angle, and hopefully we notice what I colored green here. That side has to be congruent to itself, right? Because we're looking in a mirror. So PQ is congruent to PQ because of the reflexive property. Now check this out. I've got another side. So I've got a side, an angle, and a side, judging by what I circled here. I got to figure out which order they go in. So we didn't mark that these were congruent. They told us that right here. So I've got a side, and then I get to an angle, and then I get to another side. A side, an angle, and I get to another side. That angle is smushed in between 2 sides. So side, angle, side tells me that those 2 triangles are indeed congruent. Couple more. Maybe I'll just do part of this one and let you fill in the blanks from the rest. Let's write down our givens. Pause it if you need to. Write down all your given statements. AE is congruent to CE. Let's mark that while we got it. AE, oh, it's already marked for us, is congruent to CE. So I have a side. AB is congruent to CD. I have another side, and that's marked for us. And then lastly, E is midpoint of line segment BD. All of this is given. Now, what am I going to ask myself? Why are they telling me this piece of information? E is the midpoint of this line segment here. Well, if E is the midpoint, that means it's in the middle. So this side must be the same measurement as this side, right? So BE is congruent to ED. And like I told you, if it tells me something's a midpoint, chances are my reason is going to be the definition of midpoint. And that was a side. I'm going to look at all my circled letters. I've got an S, an S, and an S. So indeed, what I am trying to prove, side, 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 is a valid argument. So I'm just going to write down this bottom piece here. I know that angle EAB is in fact congruent to triangle ECD by side, side, side. The last one here, let's write down our given. It tells us X is a midpoint of two different line segments. So X is midpoint of BY and WZ given. What do I want to get to? Triangle VWX is congruent to triangle YZX. Now ask yourself, they didn't tell us any sides or angles were congruent, but why did they tell me that X is a midpoint? So it's a midpoint of VY. If X is right in the middle of VY, what do I know about this line segment and this line segment? X is the midpoint. That's right, they've got to be congruent. So we can write that down. VX is congruent to YX because of the definition of midpoint. Now they tell us that it's a midpoint of WZ as well. They must have told us that for a reason. So let's find WZ. X is my midpoint. So you got it. That's got to be congruent to that, right? So let's write that down. WX is congruent to ZX because definition of midpoint. Now I've got a side, I got to figure out if I know another side or another angle. Hopefully we can recognize this by now. These two intersecting lines created two special, very, very special angles. I know that that angle has to be congruent to that angle because what kind of angles am I dealing with? Think about that while we write this down. What kind of angles are those? What is my justification to say that those are congruent? Angle VXW is congruent to angle ZXY. Now I've got an angle. Did you guess it right? Yeah, they're vertical angles. Just tell me why you know they're congruent, because they're vertical angles. Now we've got an angle and two sides. Let's see what order they go in. Let's use pink. I've got an angle, and then I get to a side, then I get to an angle, and then I get to another side. That angle is smooshed in between my two sides. So let's write it that way. I've got a side and an angle is smooshed in between the other side. All right, guys, practice, practice, practice. Watch these videos several times. These are going to be the reasons why you're telling me that angles or segments are congruent.